Could we all be seated?
Sure. Oh, I think that's yours. Okay.
Down on last year or the year before, I had a water bottle up here, and somebody in the audience like trolled me like, "SNWA won't even drink the tap water."
Oh,
You know?
I got it.
So,
Yeah.
I don't want a plastic bottle in front of me, but I got mine down by my foot if I need to take a
Well,
sip.
it's probably Colorado River water,
It
right?
probably is. You would think. Well, who knows where it's bottled?
Las Vegas, Nevada.
Oh, okay.
So it has to be, right?
Good morning. Good morning, everybody. I am Bart Fisher. I'm a farmer from the Lower Basin, from the Palo Verde Irrigation District. I'm the immediate past president of this great all-volunteer CRWUA organization, and I'd like to welcome you to our Lower Basin panel. It's kind of interesting. I think in 2016 we convened our first Lower Basin panel, and things looked very promising toward a certain completion promptly after CRWUA. In 2017, we re-engaged those same parties for a report out on progress in the Lower Basin. And here we are today in 2018 looking for the same report out. So I'd like to first thank Edlin Kashu, who helped me, Edlin with the Nature Conservancy of Colorado, helped me to organize this panel. And on behalf of the program committee, thank you, Edlin, wherever you are. I hope I didn't massacre the pronunciation of your last name. But thank you for all of your able assistance in organizing this panel. So we have only 45 minutes, so this is a truncated panel, and I don't want to take a lot of time, but I would like to introduce the panel moderator from the Upper Basin. He's a friend, an author, an active blogger, and a professor of water at UNM, I believe. And so it's my pleasure to introduce John Fleck, who incidentally, for those of you who have not had an opportunity to read his book about water in the West, you will find it extraordinarily interesting. It's a great read, and I encourage all of you who have not bought that book to pick up a copy. I got mine on Amazon, and it's out there, so you can buy it at a number of different places. And in fact, I told John, take about 30 seconds and pitch your next book, and which will be coming out sometime next year. So at this time, it's my pleasure to introduce John Fleck, who will then introduce our panel participants. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Bart, and it's great to be here at CRWUA again. I first came to CRWUA in 2011 when I started working on my book, and as is my tradition, every time I come to CRWUA and every time I come to Las Vegas, I try to get out to the lake, and I stop by Boulder Harbor, which is a place that I go to kind of see the rise and fall of the lake. And apropos of what Commissioner Berman told us this morning, I want to emphasize something important that I think is an important context to speaking about the Lower Basin Drought Contingency Plan. When I was here in December of 2011, lake was up over 1130. Lake Mead has dropped 50 feet since my first CRWUA. Despite the Upper Basin delivery of 4 million acre feet in excess of the minimum objective release criteria of 8.23 million acre feet a year. So we clearly have a problem, and that's what we're going to talk about in this session. We have a second kind of a problem. When I was just here in 2015, I was just finishing up the book. The thing that would become the drought contingency plan was just starting to take shape, and so I spent a lot of time talking to people. Are things going to be changing between when I hand in a manuscript in late 2015, and when the book emerges 9 months later, they didn't change. We didn't get a DCP in 2015 or 16 or 17. I'm standing up here today putting the finishing touches on another book, and Eric Kuhn, who's working with me on this new book, we had the same conversation yesterday. What's going to change between now and I hope the answer is that we have a DCP. We have some panelists here to talk about what the challenges are, what the opportunities are, what the shape of the agreement is. We have Tom Buschatzke from the Arizona Department of Resources, Arizona Department of Water Resources, Ted Cooke from the Central Arizona Water Conservation District, Peter Nelson from the Colorado River Board of California, and John Entsminger from the Southern Nevada Water Authority, panelists who have all been working on the development of the drought contingency plan. We kind of had a plan for this session, some sort of sequence of questions we needed to ask, but then Commissioner Berman said what she said this morning, kind of putting down a hammer, or holding up a potential hammer is perhaps the best way to do it. So I'd like to throw out a little bit of our questions that we had planned and start with this question. And, you know, for the panelists, you know, I think maybe we'll start with John. What is your reaction to what the commissioner said? What, if anything, does that change with the pursuit that we're now in the middle of with trying to land a DCP?
Well, thank you, John. I applaud the commissioner for taking the leadership role, taking the step of, frankly, laying down the gauntlet. I think the states need it. I think this is the appropriate juncture to have it because, as she said, close isn't done. And when you look at the hydrology, when you look at the December 24-month study just came out, and we're looking at elevation 1068 in Meade on January 1st, 2020, which will be far lower than that if Metropolitan is forced to pull their water out of the lake because DCP isn't done. I think setting the clock, having this 75-day or so window in which to push this across the finish line is the exact right thing, because I don't think responsible water managers can go into water year 2020 without a plan. So if this isn't done, then we're all going to have to submit what we think should be done, and that's not going to be to everybody's liking.
Others? No.
Commissioner, we hear you, and we appreciate the deadline. I often characterize this as if we were playing horseshoes, we got 2 points. We got close enough to get 2 points, not just the one, but we needed to get 3 points, and we got to shoot for that three-pointer now. It's important for California to approve the DCP processes by all of our Section 5 contractors, and we've been working diligently for that. I remember I got on the Coachella board in 2000, and shortly thereafter we negotiated the quantification settlement agreement, and we had deadlines, and we had an ultimate deadline, and it was that deadline that really pushed us to sign the agreements and get down from our use of 5.3 to 4.4 million acre feet. And so those deadlines hold us accountable, and we're in the same position today. John mentioned the hydrology, and it does not look good. Every speaker talks about it, but it's a real and present danger for us to be facing the hydrology that we have today and the 24-month outlook for that. So we're fully supportive of actually the deadline that was here for CRWUA, and will be working diligently for this January deadline as well.
Like the commissioner said, close is not done, and soon is not definitive enough. Having the deadline of CRWUA produced a lot of results. I think everybody can attest to that. Having this definitive deadline of January 31, complemented with a what happens next concept if that deadline is not met, is very important. In general terms, we know that we have to be done soon. In the same general time frame, Tom and I, of course, have to go to the Arizona legislature in January, but to have a specific date, specific target, is better than just to keep keep working as if we've always have another week or we always have another day. So I'm grateful for having that definition.
So without repeating what I already heard, because I agree with my three colleagues, I think it's important for Interior to continue to send that message that they will act. One of the challenges we've had in Arizona is the Arizona stakeholders are looking at the interim guidelines and the shortages that come there down to elevation 1025 and are assessing that against the additional reductions we have in the drought contingency plan. And I think it's imperative that our stakeholders hear something different from the guidelines will happen. You cannot expect merely 480,000 acre feet of shortages to be had in Arizona and letting the lake go down below 1025. And that was inherent, I think, in the commissioner's message.
Back to the plan now. Thank you. I heard a joke once, I don't remember who told it to me, that in negotiating these interstate agreements, we have representatives of states coming together, negotiating an agreement, and then returning to their communities back home to then work out the implementation details, the approvals and the implementation details. And the joke about Nevada was that John Entsminger goes to the negotiating session to negotiate an agreement, and then he has to go back to Nevada and ask John Entsminger if it's okay. And if John Entsminger says it's okay, then Nevada's on board. The approval processes within each state are very different, and I think it might be helpful to this audience, especially some folks in the Upper Basin and folks who are outside of these processes, to have a brief discussion from you all about the process you're going through and the implications for your individual state of the drought contingency plan. I think maybe we'll start with the Arizona people, and there's a slide deck. Can we get the slide? Could you advance it to the first slide of this deck? Sorry, yeah, okay. And I think this little clicker there, you want to do.
So to answer the specific question about what's our process, we don't need a slide deck for now, but
Okay, we don't need the slide deck.
so pursuant to state statute, for the director of the Department of Water Resources to bind the state of Arizona on agreements like the drought contingency plan, we need a resolution of the legislature. So with the diverse stakeholders in Arizona, you can imagine how important it is for those diverse stakeholders to stand behind me, to stand with me at the legislature when that proposed legislation is brought forth. Without that support, I would anticipate the legislation would not be passed. And so we have a robust process within Arizona to look at the impacts of the drought contingency plan on our stakeholders and to try to find ways to soften those impacts, to share the impacts, even potentially across the priority system. And I think I'll stop there because we'll probably talk more about that later.
In addition to the legislative approval at the state level that Director Buschatzke just referred to, there are numerous, probably in the couple of dozen range, agreements that will need to take place to accomplish what Tom described about finding ways to share the additional cuts that Arizona will accept under the DCP. As elsewhere in the Colorado River Basin, there are priorities. All the water that's available is allocated to somebody. If they don't use it, it's available to somebody else. And we have to respect that priority system and to find solutions that don't just shove that aside and do something else, but that will work within that and preserve that. That's hard to do. That's difficult, and that's why it is taking us so long. Not because we're slow, but because it's difficult. And so the commitments that have been made as part of the detailed implementation plan of DCP in Arizona are all going to need to be documented. That the commitments from one party to another, or from one party to a group of parties, and vice versa, all of that has to be documented, and it's a lot of work to do, of course, in the amount of time that we have. But we having been working on this for some period of time, have a very good idea about all the things that do need to be done, and can get it done, I think, or most of it at least in the time frame that we have.
If I could just follow up there for a second to sort of clarify the status of the discussions in Arizona. Are you saying that you all are at the point where the general structure of the agreement has general agreement from everyone, and it's a matter of doing all the lawyering languages of all those agreements, or are there still points of disagreement about how much water and how much financial compensation and where that will flow to mitigate impact on folks who aren't going to get water?
So the package before us, the implementation plan, I believe, has the volumes of water, compensation that's necessary, identified very specifically in every year between 2020 and 2026. There are still some trigger points in each one of those years to finalize the number, but I think there's broad support for the details of that plan. There might be a couple of small elements that we have to deal with, but largely we are there, and it is largely, as Ted described it, a matter of now creating the certainty through these documents that folks need to get comfortable that what the plan says it will do will actually happen when the time comes.
And if, as I understand, money is part of this for some compensation. Has have the sources of all the money necessary been identified and agreed to by the people who are going to be writing checks?
So I think we have identified the money. I'll let Ted talk about CAP's contribution. Governor Ducey announced that he would have $30 million in his FY20 budget request. We've had some NGOs and philanthropic groups come forward with another $8 million. That money will be used for creating conservation with the intention of that water staying in Lake Mead to offset CAP's intentionally created surplus that will come out of the lake to create some of the mitigation water for those folks who are being cut. And that principle of trying to protect the lake and not, digging a bigger hole in the lake with our internal Arizona plan is one of 4 principles Governor Ducey laid out recently that we will assess any plan against.
We've heard adjectives this morning like mostly done or almost there or largely agreed to, and those are indicative of there are still some space to close. And while there are a lot of specific numbers that are identified, I think some of those need to be tightened up, a couple of them. And then largely the way that the DCP implementation process will work in Arizona is a process more than a definitive outcome. As Tom said, there will be annual triggers. There will have to see where we are with respect to hydrology and orders and things like that, and then determine what the exact numbers are for each year. So we have to be a little bit more careful than an agreement that says 10 and 5 and 6. It's a process of how you arrive at what the real numbers will be for that year. So that takes quite a bit of care to do that. I think the words largely and mostly also apply to funding and water supplies. The funding is mostly identified, in addition to the quantity of $30 million that the governor had committed to include in next year's budget. 4 weeks ago today, the CAP board committed up to 450,000 acre-feet of ICS and other storage as available for mitigation water, and up to $60 million. And that was really, I think, the first step of major commitment of specific quantities of resources, and that really got the ball rolling. And then we saw other commitments follow from there, and momentum has built since that time. So I don't want anyone to get the impression that the lawyers are poised with their pens to start drafting documents tomorrow. They are on most of it, but there still are some of these other things that need to be tightened up a little bit.
Peter, could you explain to us a little bit about the California process and the role of the Colorado River Board of California?
Sure, thank you, John. I have been the Colorado River Board Chairman for 3 months now, and I succeeded Bart Fisher, who introduced us, John Fleck, this morning. He says he's having more fun than ever in his current role right now. I want to thank Bart for his 14-year tenure as the Colorado River Board Chairman. The Colorado River Board was formed in 1937, and it's really to protect the California river water rights on the Colorado River. And the mission is to maintain those resources, to address treaty issues, and to work with Mexico as the state representative. It's composed of 8 members that are appointed by the governor, including 2 members from the public, and a designee from the Department of Fish and Wildlife and the California Department of Water Resources chief or their designee, Janine Jones in this case. The members include 5 contractors who actually sign on the dotted line. So we're a consortium, and we have the group of the 5 contractors who are actually the signatories on all the agreements for the DCP and all the law of the river documents. That is the Coachella Valley Water District, the Imperial Irrigation District, the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, the Palo Verde Irrigation District, as well as the San Diego County Water Authority and the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. Also, we have the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and we have 2 public members. Chris Harris is our executive director, does a great job. Tanya Trujillo was before him, and Jerry Zimmerman was before her, all of which are involved in the river, which just goes to show you the longevity of people on the river, and the commitment that people have to the river is beyond none. The practical role of the Colorado River Board is to provide the technical expertise to the members. For communications, we meet once a month with all of our members, and we unequivocally have stated that we support the DCP in the importance of a soft landing. Soft landing was used quite a bit during the QSA negotiations, and we need to get to that soft landing. We found in California a soft landing meant tomorrow, and we heard that from the commissioner today. We have to do this tomorrow. This week, the Metropolitan Water District, the Southern California Board, has voted fully to support the DCP, and much like Nevada, they're ready to sign and eager to do so. The Palo Verde Irrigation District has approved their intrastate agreement with Metropolitan, and CVWD has endorsed the DCP and have only taken the position to wait on a few of the ICS agreements, which were part of the overall package that the Bureau talked about early in the process. And we believe that with the passage of a couple weeks and with Arizona moving forward with their legislation, those are imminent, and we're eager and confident to sign. Voluntary contributions to the system in California, where our priority have been quantified, and unlike the Upper Basin, we have quantified amounts, and so you can point exactly to the number. I have 3.85 million acre feet for agriculture in California, and so when you can focus on that number, it gets people pretty riled up to voluntarily put water into the system. But as we know as water managers, that is just an extremely important thing to do, is to protect the system and protect each other and protect ourselves for the future. I know that many have focused with me on what the Imperial Irrigation District position has done in the last week. And I think that they have a tremendous challenge with the people that they represent, who are very vocal and very insistent that they protect the water rights of the Imperial Valley. I think by protecting those rights, they are eager to participate in DCP, because those are cuts that could happen into the future. They had some conditional support of the DCP. They passed the DCP documents. They passed 2 of the ICS amendments. and then they put some conditions on, and one was to look at Arizona to see that they were moving forward, and we hear today that legislation is in January, and so that could meet the timeline. The other one is they wanted to see what the ICS documents were looking like, and those are being prepared and worked on at this time. The third was to address some funding of the Salton Sea. As you know, the state of California, through the Natural Resources Agency, has assumed the responsibility of mitigating Salton Sea issues. And it has been a decade of frustration in many regards, and it has frustrated our process as well. So the Farm Bill has recently been approved by the House and the Senate, and IID has lobbied that effort to make some changes in there. I'm not saying that's the answer, but it might be part of their solution with the Salton Sea. The Salton Sea is somewhat a part of the delta to the Colorado River. It's an important issue in the lower basin, and it's an important issue to IID that deserves some great consideration. With that being said, this DCP needs to move forward. California's supportive of that. And as a side note, I'd just like to congratulate and recognize Kevin Kelly, who's been a long time general manager of the IID, and he has done a yeoman's job over the years in representing IID with some challenging issues. He's retiring at the end of December, and we're all thankful for his participation and look forward to, yes, give him a hand. And we look forward to his participation in some capacity on the Colorado River.
You're quick. Your explanation was...
I wish it was as quick as you make it out to be, John. We do have a pretty straightforward process. We have the luxury of having every water and wastewater entity in Southern Nevada under the umbrella of the Southern Nevada Water Authority. So our 7-member elected board actually has a member of each city council, water district, or county commission that has a stake in the game in Southern Nevada. So those 7 elected officials have approved the deal. 3 of those same officials sit on the Colorado River Commission together with 4 gubernatorial appointees. CRC has also approved the entire deal, so we're ready to roll.
The DCP isn't the end, right? It's a bridge to something else, to the renegotiation of the interim guidelines. The renegotiations of the interim guidelines are supposed to start soon, although I think one might argue that we've been in permanent negotiations the whole time anyway, and where the boundary is not entirely clear. If we don't do a DCP, if we don't have steps like the DCP itself or something else similar imposed by reclamation, what does that do to our ability to take the necessary next steps in renegotiating the interim guidelines and the requirements that will impose on all the basin states? John?
Well, I think, you know, in times gone by, the process that we have on this river has been accused of incrementalism, that we're not doing the grand bargain, we're not looking at the big systemic problems, we're not solving the structural deficit, you know, with the DCP. And I guess I would defend the process that we've been engaged in for the last, you know, at least 25 years of taking the necessary steps as they become necessary. And that's what DCP does for me. I don't think DCP is a Band-Aid. I've seen some press, I've seen some commentary that, you know, this is not that big of a deal and not enough. If you look at the total contributions that the lower basin states would make under this combined with the country of Mexico down at elevation 1020, you're talking about, you know, 1.3 million acre feet of water that's being left in Lake Mead. So I think this is a foundational piece of whatever the future may bring. Now, does that mean this exact framework goes on forever? Is this the starting point for 2020 and beyond? I don't know. Those discussions haven't started yet, but you know, the past is prologue, right? So I think everything we've done on this river, from the interim surplus guidelines to the QSA to the 07 guidelines to minute 316 through 323, and now hopefully the DCP will set us up for successful negotiations between 2020 and 2026.
If I could just follow up, John, what would trying to do those renegotiations be like absent DCP with a dropping Lake Mead, without some sort of clear understandings of how you slow the decline of the lake?
They'd be complete chaos. I don't think I'm putting too fine of a point on that. I mean, in all likelihood, if we don't have DCP, and this, I'm not making any threats, my crystal ball is not any clearer than anybody else's, but if we don't have DCP and we're down below elevation 1050, the federal government is swinging its hammer, because DCP is nuanced. DCP is a scalpel. The federal government doesn't have that. The federal government can't implement DCP as written unilaterally. What they can do is swing a really big sledgehammer. And if that's going on and we're trying to keep the system from crashing while people are starting to file lawsuits and fights are breaking out in Congress, things could get bad very quickly.
Yeah, I would like to add to that, John. You used the word bridge, and that's a word that we use for the DCP. It is a bridge. It's a bridge to the reconsultation on the 2007 guidelines. It's a bridge to what may be the new normal of a drier future with less Colorado River supply for a long period of time. But it also is a bridge from a full supply to a lesser supply in a way that doesn't happen all at once. A large part of the implementation plan in Arizona is what we refer to as mitigation, where we use some of the resources that we have to mitigate the impacts of reductions in Arizona. Under the 2007 guidelines, the reduction in the CAP supply, which is where most of the reductions occur, is about a 20% reduction. Under DCP, under Tier 1, it's a 30% reduction. Those are both very big numbers. But if we are able to complete DCP, as I believe we will, this mitigation plan will administer the pain over time. The mitigation plan is a wedge. It doesn't last forever. It's not 100% for everybody until 2026. It does decline and go to zero before 2026. So we don't propagate an unrealistic expectation that there will always be an offset to any reductions in the future. I don't think mitigation is part of the alternative that the commissioner was referring to if we're unable to put DCP together. And frankly, the key resources that we have, including, as Tom mentioned earlier, the intentionally created surplus that has already been generated that has kept us out of shortage for 4 years, that tool will not be available without DCP. Yes, it is a bridge. It's an important bridge. It's not a bridge that goes to nowhere. It's a bridge that goes to somewhere, which is the next thing that we have to do. And I'm agree with John. If we don't have DCP without that bridge, it's very questionable to me where the starting point for the reconsultation is going to be.
So my view is collaboration breeds more collaboration. And if we get into the situation John's talking about, and that sledgehammer is being swung at us, perhaps we will go back to the places we have been in the past in terms of the divisiveness, litigation, et cetera. And certainly in the calculus for the state in terms of looking at DCP, even though we're taking huge cuts within the state of Arizona, we know that that still is the best way to move forward, because other entities, Nevada, California, Mexico, are going to help solve the problem in the lake, and we need to move forward that way.
I was having breakfast with one of my Arizona friends yesterday, and the person pulled a piece of paper out of their bag, slide from the slide deck that Jeff Keitlinger and his staff presented to their board yesterday, day before yesterday, showing the relative cuts that each state would take under the DCP. Arizona's was huge. California's was a lot smaller, Nevada's was a lot smaller, which I think illustrates why the difficulties have been so noticeably, what's been going on in Arizona has been so noticeably difficult. You all have to cut a lot more water. I'm wondering if in the process, and I want to specifically talk to Arizona, but I think this applies to all 3 states of the lower basin and the states of the upper basin, do your water users grasp that this is a smaller river than they had come to expect? Have we crossed that threshold yet where things like DCP and the next steps that will be needed to continue to reduce water use even further can in fact be done? I'm especially interested in Arizona, but I think all 3 of you have.
So let me start, and I believe that they have grasped that concept that we're going to be involved in a drier future with less water. And I say that because earlier versions of the implementation plan sought 100% mitigation for every user group through 2026. And it got to the point where we realized we did not have the resources, neither water nor money, to make that happen, and that we were setting up an expectation, perhaps, that we could continue to do that forever in the face of a drying river and less flows. And so when we made that shift about a month ago to a plan that really does not look at full mitigation, it actually cuts off mitigation in the last, or reduces it and cuts it off in the last 3 years of the DCP. And so, given the level of support we've heard from the stakeholders, I take that as recognition that we indeed are looking at a much drier future and have to deal in the long term with less flow in the Colorado River.
Quickly agree with what Tom just said, and then also add that there's always, I always look for a silver lining, and one of the silver linings in the immense amount of time that we've taken to get to this point is that the public has had a lot of time and a lot of exposure to absorb the gravity of what it is that we're talking about and the necessity to do this, and particularly in the last 5 to 6 months or so when we've had our stakeholder process and all the offshoots of that, the steering committee process and all the offshoots of that has been intensely scrutinized by the press, not only in our own state but elsewhere in the basin. It would be very difficult for average citizen to miss what's going on, and I think everyone has done a terrific job in getting that message out there. It's complicated, so it's a challenge to communicate clearly, but in large part, the public understands what we have to do and why we have to do it.
John, thanks for the question. I'm convinced that California residents are fully aware of a potential drier future. The Metropolitan Water District has invested billions of dollars in storage for the wet times and relies upon that. Diamond Valley Lake, a $2 billion project, groundwater storage projects. San Diego has their desalination plant that provides 7% of their water supply, and they're actively investing in pure water systems that use recycled water. Recycled water in California is a huge issue in the urban area, and agriculture is now using and getting on board with recycled water as well to make maximum use of the limited water supply. And so I think across the state that we're seeing these investments being made. We're actively pursuing the California Water Fix, which would be able to garner more water in wetter and flood conditional times, and so and move that water into the storage in Southern California that has been developed. So we're vitally interested in what happens here in Colorado and the water supply, and I think that the ag users are fully aware as well, and they're defending some of their positions, and we're working through those issues, and we'll get there in the end.
And I guess I would just say there's a perverse benefit to actually having Lake Mead in your backyard, because our citizenry, many of whom remember going out to Lake Mead in 1982, 1983, and watching the river spill during flood control operations. And now year over year over year, they've seen it steadily decline, 150 feet or so. Now our citizens are well aware of what we're facing in terms of the future water supply, and they've been very supportive of giving us the resources to address it. Much as Peter said, we've spent, going on $1.5 billion to put new infrastructure into Lake Mead, and that doesn't increase our capacity to take water out of the lake by a single gallon. That's just redundant infrastructure in the face of drought and climate change.
Yeah, one more thing to add is LADWP has gone on to a stormwater capture program in their area, and that's going to supply a lot of local water in addition to their Eastern Sierra Valley, Owens Valley supply. So it's across the region. We have these huge projects getting built with big dollars to address limited water supply.
So we're almost out of time, but I have one final question that follows on this. Eric Kuhn, I'm working with on our new book, likes to talk about the fact that as we go forward planning for the basin, we're not sure where the floor is, which is to say we don't know how low the flow of the river can go. We've planned the DCP, we're using the stress test hydrology, which grasps a much drier river than the traditional record we have used. Have we learned things in the preparation of the DCP that can help us craft new rules post-DCP that give us the flexibility to manage that tremendous uncertainty of a river that could be a lot smaller? And please, brief answers, because we're almost out of time.
So you mentioned the stress test hydrology. I'll mention one key element of the DCP, and that's increasing the flexibility to create intentionally created surplus as a tool to prop up Lake Mead, but also to take delivery of that intentionally created surplus in ways that you cannot do that right now. So that's to incentivize storage in Lake Mead, give people a flexibility, and I think it's one of the more creative tools in the drought contingency plan.
Briefly, I think, yes, that we have learned a lot through this process. Here we are, a decade or so into the 2007 guidelines, and we have to basically have a do-over because things changed. And there's probably a lot more than we can learn. One of the key provisions, from my perspective, that is in the DCP that was not in the guidelines was more of forward-looking reconsultation. The 2007 guidelines was consultation begins no later than the end of 2020. These documents have, the DCP has a flexible reconsultation based on leading indicators of projections or showing the lake getting down to certain levels and things like that will force us to come back and talk before we realize that, boy, this isn't working out the way we thought it was going to. And there's probably a lot of other lessons that we can learn to make things more flexible and adaptive.
So John here had a great discussion about the process and how DCP is just part of the process, and I liken that to Apple has chosen the Colorado River model, Apple, the iPhone. They have updates every now and then, and the DCP is like an update to the iPhone. And when we're going to renegotiate in 2026, starting in 2020, which is tomorrow, we're going to be working on not a totally new phone, but a major update, and I think we're going to have a lot of fun doing it.
Yeah, I think just said another way, that's the primary lesson, right? The law of the river isn't carved on stone tablets, right? I think just since we sat up here last year, we've learned not to disincentivize the upper basin from putting water into Lake Powell, right? We were like, oh, but the law of the river says, blah, blah, blah. It's like, who cares? It's like they want to put water into Lake Powell. Guess what? Gravity works. Eventually it's coming to us. So we need to be flexible.
I'd like to thank our panelists very much.
Oh, we can see what's up too. Okay. I'll sit down here.
Is that next to me?
Yeah, hi.
Hold this end up.
I'm Leslie.
Keith Moses.
Nice to meet you.
He's there and Derwingson. Nice to meet you.
Okay, so we can kind of get rid of one chair.
Mark Harris is going to join us, so I'll save a spot. for him,
Okay,
if that's
okay, yeah, yeah. Oh, I forgot. Now I have met him once.
Hi.
Hi.
Nice to meet you.
Absolutely, yeah. You're like me, yeah. So I have not had time to spend on this.
I think we're going to get started so we can get you all to lunch
We all
on time.
look the same except
So if people could take their seats, that would be great.
Me too.
Thank you. Could I get you all up in the front to take your seats, please, so we can get started and get you out of here on time? Thank you very much. So we're here this afternoon. You've heard a lot about the DCPs, or as we're now calling them, the iPhone update. And so we're going to get perspectives from a really great diversity of panelists here. I would like to start out by having the panelists introduce themselves, and then we're going to jump right into questions.
Good morning. My name is Catherine Sorensen. I'm the director of Phoenix Water Services. Phoenix Water Services is the largest potable utility in the state of Arizona. We are also a combined water and wastewater utility. We serve about 1.6 million people across about 540 square miles.
Good morning. Aaron Derwingson with the Nature Conservancy in our Colorado River program. We work throughout the entire Colorado River Basin in the U.S. and Mexico, working to protect and restore healthy river flows. And I work as our agricultural coordinator, building partnerships with ag water users and water managers, trying to develop and implement projects and programs that are really a win-win for ag and the river. And I've worked closely with Mark Harris here on some system conservation pilot program work and other similar tools.
Good morning. Mark Harris, General Manager, Grand Valley Water Users Association in Grand Junction, Colorado. We're the managing entity for a portion of the Grand Valley project, which provides water not only to the Water Users Association, but to Orchard Mesa, Palisade, and Mesa County irrigation districts, and to the power plant at Orchard Mesa Irrigation District, and we have together. We divert off of the main stem of the Colorado, down through the canyon for about 5 miles, and then on 35, 40 miles on out to Utah. We have become fairly deeply involved with several of these, what are now come to be known as DCP and demand management issues, both personally and organizationally involved with System Conservation Pilot Program and every other program that has an acronym that we have come to know. So glad to be here. Thank you.
Leslie?
the clicker. Here, take this one. Thanks. Hi, I'm Leslie James. I'm Executive Director of the Colorado River Energy Distributors Association. I'm going to take probably a little more time than a couple my predecessors just to talk about who the hydropower customers are in the Colorado River Storage Project, and then who CRETA is.
Could you
I'm
bring
going to put up
the
the
slide, the map? I think we have a map. Would you like to use your map now?
yeah.
Yeah, great, perfect.
Got it. Okay. This is a map that I borrowed from the Western Area Power Administration. What this map shows is the service territories of all of the firm electric service customers or contractors of the Colorado River Storage Project. And just to say a couple of things so that to put some of my next remarks in context. All of these customers are by law nonprofit entities. There are about 135 contractors, including 54 tribal entities that are as I call them, the firm electric service customers that contract with the Western Area Power Administration for delivery of the generation that is produced by the reclamation facilities within the Colorado River Storage Project. So as you're aware, Glen Canyon Dam is the largest facility, but also Flaming Gorge and Aspinall you've heard about in DCP discussions. Just one additional point I'd like to make. The power revenues that come from these long-term firm contracts ensure repayment of the federal investment plus interest in the Colorado River Storage Project. This includes also the transmission system that is so important in grid reliability within the West. Also, the rates paid by these customers include a significant amount of irrigation assistance, and they fund what we refer to as the non-power programs, such as a salinity control program and environmental programs such as the Upper Basin and San Juan RIPS, recovery implementation programs, and the Glen Canyon Dam Adaptive Management Program. So within this context, the CRETA members represent and serve about 4.1 million customers within this region. So unless you're a California person, you may very likely be receiving the benefit of this federal hydropower from your local community, could be political subdivision, state agency, agricultural pumping, project use customer, tribes. But as I said at the beginning, the common theme is they are all not-for-profit, and the rates that they pay are all cost-based. So thank you.
Leslie. Just a critical component of this basin that we don't talk enough about, I think. Keith, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Kamadhu. I bring you greetings from the Mojave, Chemehuevi, Hopi, and Navajo people of the Colorado River Indian tribes. We're a tribe in Arizona. We have senior water rights on the Colorado River, and we have been involved in discussions since DCP started even years ago to get to this point. So we're a tribe that wants to help, and with the situation, we realize as we heard in the last session, and also from Commissioner Berman this morning, that the water is not coming back anytime soon. So our tribe has been involved with these discussions to offer whatever assistance we can, and we appreciate being invited today to this panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Keith. Well, I think you can see from those introductions that we've got a great range of perspectives from Upper Basin to Lower Basin and across a variety of constituencies. So I think I'd like to start our questions with each of you. Now we've seen the draft DCPs. They're not done, and they're not done, but we certainly have a lot of information about them. If you could each give us both a couple of things that make you hopeful by having reviewed those documents, and then also, is there anything that keeps you up at night about them? So Catherine, I think I'll start with you, then Leslie, Keith, Mark, and Aaron.
Sure. So discussions regarding the Arizona implementation of the DCP have been interesting, complicated, might one say difficult. It's important to understand that we are looking at giving up a very large amount of Colorado River water in central Arizona, nearly half. That's a painful conversation. And of course, everyone thinks that their own water use is justified and that no one else's is, right? But what does make me hopeful is that there were far more stakeholders and participants at the table in the Arizona discussions than I have seen in the 20 years that I've been doing this. And with all due respect to the engineer in Wyoming, I think I own the drought because I started in February of 2000. And that's all I've known in water policy in Arizona. But there were far more voices at the table. That's really important to our water future because as difficult as this has been, it will only be more complicated and more difficult in the future. all those voices, all those resources, all those perspectives are going to be necessary to deal with a hotter and drier future. What keeps me up at night? That's easy. Neither the existing guidelines nor the DCP really provide much, if any, certainty about what happens below 1025. Certainly, I hope I'm wrong, but I think that's where we're headed. And at the end of the day, Phoenix's risk tolerance is much less than some of the other stakeholders at the table because we have to make sure people have water at the tap 24/7, 365.
Thank you, Catherine. Leslie?
Thanks. We are a little bit behind some of the other participants in terms of being involved in the DCP process. We first heard some details and learned the details about October 10th when the information was provided publicly. We are still in the process of attempting to kind of figure out what does this mean? What does it mean in terms of the stress cases? What does it mean in step 2, I'll call it? And, so I'm not sure that I could pinpoint something that I see as a real positive other than the discussions that I've heard today from the panels about ensuring that those who are bearing the risk of the DCP and the steps that come are at the table. Those, the service territories of the folks that you saw on the previous map, from the power side of things, I'm going to put up another slide. One thing that we do know, when the lake levels are reduced, either hydrologically, well, obviously through hydrology, there's less hydraulic head and there is less energy produced. When there's less energy produced, obviously the rates and the repayment obligations still have to be made, but those obligations are being made with less product. So the tension there is if the contract requirements and obligations can't be met because of lake levels or restrictions, Western Area Power and or the customers have to be out on the open market purchasing the power to make up those loads that they serve. Purchase power amounts can vary widely. We've seen years when they're in the $2 to $4 to $5 to $6 million range. We've seen a year, I think, where we were up about $90 million. So that's a very wide range and a very kind of an uncertain range. In addition, an added benefit that this federal hydropower has is it's clean, renewable, and carbon-free. Glen Canyon Dam offsets about 2.5 million tons of carbon a year. So when these lake levels reduce, that very good benefit is also reduced. And when WAPA or the customers have to go out and make up the power to meet their loads, very likely that power is not federal hydropower because we're all in one basin here, but instead it is probably or potentially a carbon type of resource. Obviously with new renewables coming on, wind and solar, those can't be operated in a vacuum, and hydropower is one of the best resources to help support those renewables. So what am I wondering about or feeling a little bitter about or really not knowing about is the how and the when. How will DCP be implemented? We know there are triggers. We don't know what comes next. When? That's a question. I think we heard a little more certainty today from the commissioner, but I think one of our key messages here today is to ensure that those who are bearing the risk of these decisions need to be engaged and at the table. I'm going to show one last slide. I talked about lake levels due to hydrology, but the hydropower resource has been significantly restricted since about 1997. Environmental and other operational constraints also do the same thing that lake levels do. The energy is potentially less available, and also the timing of the energy. Those of you who are water and irrigation folks know that you have seasons when you need irrigation resources. The same is true with power resource. There are times of day and times of year that the resource may not be needed as much or may be less valuable, and other times it's significantly more important. So these slides will just kind of show you a visual of how the changes are continuing to be implemented at these Colorado River Storage Project facilities. So we see DCP as a potential, it's an overlay, but we see it. I think there are some ways in working with everyone to find ways to not have as significant of an impact on hydropower. But I wanted to just show you kind of the difference we've seen in those years, and in 2016, there's been further restrictions.
Keith, can we get your perspective on these drafts?
As I stated in my opening remarks, that the Colorado River Indian Tribes has been involved with the discussion since the beginning, and it's been interesting in the room as, again, I know that our first panelist said that everybody wants to have their own, everybody thinks their own issues are the most important issues. And it reminds me of the 7 stages of grief, because I think we've been in denial for a long time. And then we got this, the report that shows exactly how dire our situation is on the Colorado River. And we've been forced into that room in Arizona to discuss what can we do to help. That, to me, is the foundation of DCP. All those agencies are wanting to help everyone in our area in the basin, upper and lower basin area, and in California and along that way, that we conserve the water. To me, when I get into rooms with people, and I said maybe I'm simple and I don't fully understand all these things sometimes, but to me the best way of conserving water is not to use it. It's not to grow. It's not to continue to drain the Colorado River. But realistically looking at it, that's not going to happen. So I think from our standpoint, what I get out of being in those meetings is that even though we reach situations where maybe we're about to all break out in a brawl in there, we come back to the table. We continue to work. We continue to move forward to get this done. I don't know what the final form is going to look like, but I know that we are committed to completing this and moving it forward more so than ever. So I just appreciate again that we're also a part of those and able to help with what we can do as far as the Colorado River Indian Tribes. Thank you.
I think when we do a word cloud of the conference, interesting is going to be right at the center of it. Mark, you want to give us your good, bad, and hopefully not the ugly of the DCP draft?
Likely, we're going to try to avoid it being indifferent is the best we're going to try to do. But, you know, and I would be remiss if I didn't thank Edelyn and CRWUA for inviting me here again this year. And for Mary, I need to share with you one thing she did tell me, that she said, I have presented with you before, Mark, and I want to make sure you understand the definition of brief. So, Mary, we're going to keep these brief.
I did not.
You know, there are some hopeful signs. We have had the good fortune to be involved in a lot of these discussions at our appropriate level over the last several years. And I think there's a couple of 3 things that we would point to as being productive. I think that there's an increasing awareness that any DCP or resulting demand management activities that do not yield sustainable agriculture and robust rural communities is not good enough. Mm-hmm. I think that especially in the upper basin, perhaps, is that the process has allowed many more people to become aware of the problem, however they define it, however the scope of that problem is. But without being aware, people will give no importance to an issue. So I think that for all of the discussions, whether pleasant or otherwise, I think that awareness has certainly been raised. And I should add one acronym to the awareness that we have raised. SOB is a term that has been used with us several times. Some of the things that concern us, I guess I've been in the water management business in my position now for 5 years, so I'm beginning to sleep well with problems on the horizon. But I think, you know, and I have to preface this comment with many of you who we've had the opportunity to work with, hope recognize that personally, and for many of the people that I serve and respond to, is that they have remained very open to new kinds of thinking that are very scary and threatening. And I appreciate that opportunity, both with many of you that are in this room and beyond, and with the boards and customers that we serve. And I too celebrate this achievement. But and I don't pretend to be a representative of agriculture or agricultural water or anything like that, but hopefully we can convey a couple of the concerns that folks that we serve have. So when I say that I have to keep this kumbaya moment in perspective, is that I hope to share some of the concerns with those people that have shared their concerns with me. As many of the other folks that are here, and especially three of them that are on this panel, the Grand Valley water users and folks like us are going to be those who are charged with executing and implementing the policy decisions that many of you make. And we have been watching this process over the last 24 months, realizing that something had to be done. We recognize the problem, but it doesn't make the pain and suffering any easier for anyone. Given the amount of conserved consumptive use that agriculture uses, obviously we understand that we're going to go through the first two legs of Upper Basin drought contingency planning pretty quickly, and we're going to go to demand management. I think it's important that we recognize that and that we continue to take that message to all those policymakers who we believe that everyone wants to try to make the best decisions. We know there's going to be pain. We'd like to see it spread out over time, and we think that probably a soft landing is going to look something like jumping off the Colorado National Monument. But specifically, property rights, community issues, pricing issues, supply and demand kinds of things, you know, when they can get me to pay $14 for a Keurig cup first thing in the morning, demand will drive certain things that we may otherwise never do. But we put a lot of our concerns under what I've come to term the no good deed goes unpunished umbrella. And we think that although all of us are going to have to participate at various levels, and whether we call DCP and demand management activities bridges, band-aids, precursors to renegotiation of the interim guidelines, that willing participation in conserved consumptive use can easily become expectations. And we believe that without the necessary legislative protections, probably state by state, is that it's going to be very difficult to have many people feel good about those sacrifices. I would suggest that for all of you who are charged with much more weighty policy decisions than I will ever have, is that we need to continue to win the minds and hearts of the boards and the associations out there throughout the West. Without that, it's going to be a very difficult time. It's doable, and the information needs to keep coming and flowing in both directions. So I think I'll stop there, Mary.
Great, thanks. And Aaron, why don't we wrap up this first question round with you?
Great, thanks, Mary. I think, you know, from our perspective, when we think about a healthy river and what it needs for the fish and wildlife, we first recognize that you can't work on environmental water security in a box without thinking about water security for people, for communities, and that's where we start from. And so I think the thing that most hopeful about with the DCP is that we absolutely need a plan in place ahead of a crisis. We need that fundamental level of water security in order to think about what the river needs from a wildlife perspective. And I'm hopeful about the work that the states and reclamation have done to date to proactively address these risks posed by hydrology, and the work they've done to really lay the groundwork that's in the DCP. You know, that said, I think something specific for the Upper Basin is the process that's laid out to work on the feasibility of demand management. Our work with Mark and others in the system conservation pilot program showed that there's incredible interest from producers in participating, and that there's a way to design these projects in a way that not only generates water savings for the water security benefit, but that can provide other multiple benefits for these communities and for the environment. But those projects also raised a number of questions about how a program could work at scale. And if we think that demand management, if done thoughtfully, could be a really good solution to balance our water needs and address these risks in a dry time, with the UCRC and Reclamation in the states having the ultimate decision-making authority, I think I'm, again, hopeful about the process that's going to unfold for all stakeholders to come together and provide the input and help develop a program that's going to work to, again, provide the water security we need, but do so in a way that supports vibrant ag, communities, and a healthy river. And then I think on the flip side, the thing that I'm most hopeful about is also the thing that keeps me up at night, that's a big process. There are a lot of questions to address, and thinking through how that's going to work and how we can most effectively answer those questions and how we do it with sort of the appropriate sense of urgency, how we move forward with a purpose and knowing that if things can get bad in a hurry, how do we keep the momentum going to address these questions in a timely manner?
That's great, thanks. I think what I'd like to turn to now are a couple of other topics. One, first, if these do get done, what steps does your particular constituency need to have top of mind to get implementation underway? And after we go through that round, I think I'd like to ask a little bit about what if they don't get done? And we have a few dry years in the basin. How will your constituency or your clients, what will they have to do? So I think I'd like to go in the same order, if you don't mind, with those questions. And if you want to take them both, either way.
Sure. So Phoenix normally stores some of its Colorado River water in Tucson aquifers because it effectuates our exchange with the city of Tucson. And our exchange with the city of Tucson is basically a way for the city of Phoenix to continue to receive direct deliveries of surface water at our surface water treatment plants during a shortage. This use of water is extremely valuable to us because it is how we make sure there's still water at the tap during shortages on the Colorado River. However, as part of the Arizona implementation of the DCP, Phoenix will deliver Colorado River water to irrigation districts in Pinal County instead of sending some of that water to Tucson. In doing so, Phoenix earns a long-term storage credit in Pinal County equal to the amount of water that the farmers in Pinal County are not pumping because they're using the surface water, the Colorado River water that we're delivering to them. The problem is that a long-term storage credit in Pinal County is basically worthless to the city of Phoenix. So we're going to be entering into an exchange with the Arizona Water Banking Authority where we'll exchange credits in Pinal County for credits in Maricopa County. Maricopa County credits are more valuable to us than Pinal County credits, but it is still more difficult for me to turn that long-term storage credit into a wet water delivery compared to when I store water in Tucson. So my part of implementing the Arizona DCP solution will be to convince the Phoenix City Council that delivering Colorado River water to irrigation districts in Pinal County is a reasonable compromise. And my job will be to ensure that that goes through successfully. And then I would say, like all other stakeholders in Arizona, part of my job will be to make sure that the Arizona implementation of the DCP can move forward successfully in the state legislature. You want me to answer the second part?
Yeah,
okay. So if the DCP is not entered into, that's the question, and we continue with dry years, well, I mean, that's obviously not good news for Phoenix, or I think for anyone in this room. 40% of the water delivered in the city of Phoenix comes from the Colorado River. Under the existing guidelines, the Arizona Water Banking Authority, the districts in Pinal County, the Central Arizona Groundwater Replenishment District, they all lose water before the cities and Indian communities do. We don't really get cut under existing guidelines until a Tier 2 or Tier 3 shortage declaration. But more to the point, what we're planning for is what we're planning and building for is what happens below 1025, because that's what really concerns us. Phoenix has spent decades building a very physically and legally diverse, very robust basket of alternative supplies. But today, I don't have the infrastructure that I need to move those alternative supplies to areas of the Phoenix distribution system that are vulnerable to Colorado River shortages. So that is what we will continue to work towards.
Some amazingly complex challenges from one of the Southwest's largest cities to be facing. Keith, you want to give us a little perspective on those two questions?
The Colorado River Indian tribes' water rights are first priority on the river. So going to the question about the 2019, if it's a dry and the DCP isn't passed, it won't affect us. It'll be a limited effect and it won't affect us in regards to our water use. But our concern has always been all the water users on the Colorado River, what that will do to the ecosystem, to the areas surrounding, and all of those that are along the river or use of the river, so that we continue to offer our support and we continue to help in any way that we can to push DCP through, so we don't have to look at that forecast for the future. But for the Colorado River Indian tribes, that's what would be our effect from this DCP not being passed. Thank you.
You know, I was thinking a lot about that question. The first part of the question is, what are we doing to be involved or to try to participate in the implementation and going forward? A couple of aspects that we understand are in the Upper Basin DCP are reservoir recharge and then also releases from Aspinall and Flaming Gorge to get down to Glen Canyon Dam. The reservoir recharge, as we're starting to understand it, we still have some work to do, but in that situation, there could be some effects on hydropower because you would not be releasing, which goes back to my analogy of less energy equals more cost. Again, timing is very critical for the hydropower resource. But also then during DCP releases, if there are releases that potentially bypass out of Flaming Gorge or Aspinall, when there are bypass releases done either for flood control or for experiments on the river, during the time of bypass, there's no energy generated. So that's a lost value. When in trying to look at the impacts if a DCP is not implemented, I don't think that I can say unilaterally how it would affect all of CRETA members or all of the CRSP customers, because each and every one of these contractors or customers, the Colorado River Storage Project resource is a different portion of its total resource mix. Each of these entities has obligations to serve their communities and their customers, but they utilize the resource in different ways. One end of the spectrum, for instance, is the Navajo Tribal Utility Authority. NTUA's total resource mix for serving their customers is about 60% of it is CRSP hydropower. Ranging down to some of the smaller customers, it's kind of a double whammy. Some of the smaller CRSP customers have the biggest percentage of their resource mix being CRSP. So when that larger portion is affected price-wise or availability-wise, they potentially can take a bigger hit. So if with the rate 2019 is stacking up, we're already starting to look at the potential purchase power effects that we're going to start seeing. And when these utilities have to plan to meet their loads, the uncertainty is always something they really don't like, but the uncertainty is there. So we're starting to look at, over the years, we've had to look at and deal with other situations back in the early 2000s with market conditions, pricing, or drought. And we've always seemed to be able to be creative enough to work with Western Area Power Administration and Reclamation to come up with solutions that, that work for a while. So I have confidence in these processes that the collective leadership here will kind of do the right thing, and hopefully the DCP process will finish up soon.
Thank you. Really interesting, Leslie. Mark, can we turn to you?
We have lately begun to develop kind of a little chart that looks like the fire danger chart in the National Forest, and on one side is panic, and on the other side is prepare, and we're trying to find some balance in between there, and some days it's absolutely pegged in the red on panic, as we're like most of 2019 was. We were in new territory in a lot of ways in 2018 in our area. We set new records on heat, on water use, on all kinds of things. It was a pretty stark illustration of what climate change would look like for an irrigation company or for various parts of the river. So, although recognizing the incredible importance of these documents and how they evolve, is that actually our activities probably will continue apace either way, whether these things come up to be signed now. We believe that they will be eventually in some form. So we have two projects that we're working on for next year. And first is just based on hydrology. 2019 Water Ops is an attempt to kind of model what another year like last year would look like, how we start earlier in managing HUP reservoir releases at Green Mountain and so forth. We also have an ongoing project we call Beyond Conserved Consumptive Use, which engages a number of folks from various resource and economic communities in order to continue to prepare for the eventualities of having to do demand management before any of us are ready to do so. We've been working on that project in one form or another for the last 3 years, and we will continue. I would say we got approval from our board to stay involved in these activities, even though our conserved consumptive use programs ended on November 1st. If indeed all documents are signed and things progress as we think we need to, especially based upon what we heard today, and keeping in mind that as a reclamation project, we keep that connection very much in mind, usually a blessing, but not always perhaps. But if it passes, I'd say that the focus of our involvement with what demand management should look like will be much more refined, as there'll start to be some sort of guidelines, some sort of expectation on time spent, and that would actually probably help us think even clearer in terms of what other people are thinking about our potential demand management activities. So we want to try to stay vigilant, dry or wet.
Dry or wet. Aaron, why don't we wrap up this round with you, and we've got a couple minutes left after.
Yeah, so assuming the DCPs pass, I think, like Mark said, not to take anything away from the great work that's been done, but from our perspective, a lot of the real work is going to begin once they pass, especially for the Upper Basin, right, which lays out a process for both the drought ops and the demand management work. And, looking at that, if they get passed, we want to continue to be a good partner and a good partner in that process, or bring in our strengths in science, our role as a convener and a problem solver to really keep doing the work that we've been doing, engaging with our partners in the ag community, with municipalities and others to really try and understand the issues and the consequences, and continue to develop, these innovative solutions that can focus on certainty for water users, certainty for the river, and water security for our communities. If they don't pass, I think, my answer is pretty similar. We're going to keep doing that work. We know from the science that flows have and will probably continue to decline. And so we're going to keep focusing on what are those innovative tools that can increase water security for both people and nature. What do they look like on the ground? How do you implement them now and in the long term? How do we start to test and demonstrate these tools and continue to engage in conversations around the DCP or whatever other long-term strategies there are for providing that water security?
Great, thank you. I just wanted to offer the panelists, if we've got about a minute and a half left, if there's anything you wanted to say but didn't get to in response to those questions, please add it in. I think we're good here. Thank you all for being here. Oh, did you have something? No. And you know, these are complex problems, but great leadership to tackle them and a lot of goodwill. So thank you all.
Nice to see you.
Good to meet you briefly.
My goodness, we're going to get that thing put together.